to?
Well, I think there's a lot of progress made, and there's a lot of opportunities available. I think the biggest problem, because we have been, and I have been working particularly with the least developed countries, you know, those who are particularly, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa.
Particularly Namibia?
Yes, that was one of the. We also worked in Ghana and still working in Ghana. But what we find, you know, by also collaborating with a much wider range of countries, you know, but of the category of least developed countries, is that the capacity really to make use of all these enormous lots of opportunities is not really there.
So that's capacity development in ministries throughout the education system. Are there one or two areas where you think we can make a really critical catalytic intervention, or is it very much across the board?
Well, it's really, I mean, let me just sort of, because you enter into a very complex kind of system if you look at, and I'll explore a bit more about that in my presentation, about the education system as such. But I think there are two critical areas which we might have not looked at. One is the role of the teacher. Yes. There seem to be lots of interventions that actually try to circumvent and bypass the teacher. I think that's the wrong way. There seems to be also efforts in trying to bypass the whole education system because it's perceived as being too slow, too conservative. I don't believe in that, because education is and remains one of the fundamental
it takes time.
services.
It takes time. I mean, you can't make an immediate intervention overnight. That if we're going to change education, it's a whole systemic change.
And you know what we also discover is that you know, ministries as such are not acquainted with the technology. So I think I think that in the education system, the big problem is really what is it that, and one doesn't know that. What is it that really wants to be achieved by using the technology? And that is the big question which I'm going to try to elaborate on more.
Okay. And also, when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that some of the sessions you'd been to here during PCF5 so far have been focused very much on the tertiary level. Yes. I guess from what you're saying that we need to have a much more joined up approach to education. I think if we look at the MDGs, many people say they focus primarily on primary education, whereas the EFA goals are much broader. Yeah. Certainly one of the things that I'm conscious of is you can't have good secondary teachers unless you've got a good higher education system. And likewise, you need good secondary system to have a good primary teachers. Yeah. Are there ways in which we can use open and distance learning, ICT, in education more systemically to get these joined up? Have you got some good case studies that you were mentioning?
Well, I think there are good examples out there, but I think that basically one needs to have the kind of the viewpoint of the national perspective. You know, from a development point of view, the national perspective is really the most important one. And if you cut that out into just sort of different layers and address them sort of separate from each other, you don't really get the whole national perspective fully. And so what we find is that system-wide, you need a system-wide approach actually in looking at the education system. Because, I mean, don't forget that, you know, what comes into universities is actually a result of what the rest of the education system produces, which means that if you really want to see what the quality of education, you know, and that you want to change the education system, you actually have to address all the different layers of it, not just the tertiary level. I do understand why that is happening, but I think that is a shortcoming, and I think that that a lot of those methods used, I mean, in which are presented here, can very easily be sort of also made available for in a wider sense.
Okay. And you were also mentioning, and particularly through your work in Jesse, partnerships.
Yes.
Do you believe that partnerships have a significant impact to offer, or is this something that should be driven primarily by governments?
Well, I'm a firm believer, first of all, in the potential of ICTs in improving the education, both quantitatively and qualitatively. But I'm also a strong believer in that the education system is not capable of doing it. It's not capable of fixing itself. It actually requires and needs the assistance by private sector. But the way that is done has to be under the leadership of the education objectives. And there's fundamentally, in every country, there's one sort of authority, one entity which is in charge of that, which is the education area.
Although in many countries you can have parallel ministries, and I think going back to this separation between higher education and primary and secondary education, there's often a break between two different ministries, and I think that can sometimes...
Yes, and in some countries they have even more ministries than that. I don't think there is one size that fits all, because countries are different and for different reasons they have different structures. But what they are still part of one overall system. And if they are not brought together, sort of, you have different layers which do not then sort of function properly in relation to each other, and then the outcome must be sort of affected, I assume.
Yeah. In my own work in Africa, I tend to oscillate between being very enthusiastic and passionate about successes, and also sometimes I go there and think, oh, gosh, we haven't made any progress at all. Just before we go out and listen to your keynote, if you had one sort of positive thing to share with the people who are going to be there this afternoon, what would that be? One positive sort of final thing.
Well, that's the passion by the kids and the youth. That's absolutely something which is so striking, and that's where the energy and that's where the dynamics come from. So if the education system was capable of actually capturing that kind of passion and enthusiasm, and liberating it and supporting that and making that would be incredible differences out there.
Astrid, thanks ever so much. It's great to talk to you, and I, along I'm sure with everyone else, really look forward to the wider story you have to share with us this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.